On today's show, we're going to tackle the age-old question of what is under extrusion. Stick around. Hey, welcome back to The First Layer. My name's Richard. This is the channel that teaches you the world of 3D printing, and today's no different. Recently, we've had a lot of questions about under extrusion, both through our emails, comments on our Facebook group, and through our live streams. Recently, last Saturday, we had a number of questions on it. Now, recently, I also got in a printer from a client of mine who was having the same problem. So let's discuss what under extrusion really is. Now, under extrusion occurs when too little filament is extruded during a print. This can result in gaps, missing layers, insufficiently small layers, and even little dots and holes in layers. Print quality and even print strength is compromised when under extrusion occurs. Now, in the following examples, and I'm going to go through each one of these, we're going to talk about the fixes to under extrusion, but let's first quickly discuss what causes under extrusion. Well, there's many things that can cause it. One can be insufficient flow in the path of the filament. There could be some blockages in your filament path. There could be strain in your filament path. There could be just bad filament. Also, what we've recently found out is that a breeze coming in from an open window or from a ceiling fan can adversely affect your 3D print, either through under extrusion or through doing coming off the bed, just cooling way too fast, coming off the bed and causing a nasty problem. And that's when we get those giant snot balls around our extruders, or our hot ends, pardon me. So let's first dive into the first tip on how to fix our under extrusion. Then we're going to look at some examples. So the first thing that you want to do is take a look at your extrusion multiplier. Now, if your extrusion is pushing enough or isn't pushing enough filament, pardon me, the most obvious course of action is to increase the extrusion multiplier or the flow. Now, you can set this in your slicer. Now, by doing so, more filament flows, hopefully resulting in a satisfactory extrusion. Now, tweaking this setting, you don't want to tweak it any more than about 2.5%. That's 2.5% for each time that you run a test. Now, we ran 4 tests here, and I'll go through what we did on each test in just a little bit. Now, when you find that spot, note, however, that increasing this setting too much can cause jamming. So it's a fine line. You do not want to increase that flow more than 15%. So if you're increasing it by 2.5%, you'll know that 2.5 times 2 equals 5%. So you're only going to want to do this about 6 times to, somewhere in there, maximum 6 times. You don't want to go over 115% extrusion because you will cause jamming. And that's caused when things start coming up. And we're going to have a look at a couple of things. Now, the other thing that you can do is you can increase your print temperature. And this is the first thing that I want you to try if you're having this problem, is I want you to increase your print temperature by 50 degrees, or 5 degrees, pardon me, each increment. So if you started off at 200, you're getting under extrusion, maybe put that up to 205. And if you're still getting a little bit, go up to 210. You don't want to go too far because then you're just going to cook that plastic and it's just going to become way too malleable and it will stretch even more, okay? So that's something you want to watch as well. Now, when you increase the temperature by 5 degrees increments until you find that proper temperature for your machine and material, you can tweak the setting either by repeatedly printing a test and adjusting the temperature, which is what we did in today's case, or you can do something like this, a temperature tower, which is something that you've heard me talk about a million times on this show. It's something that I think everybody needs to do with every new roll of filament. Now, understand that if your filament has been sitting out for a while, it may have gotten some moisture in it through the air. So if you live in a humid climate, you may be more susceptible to this than somebody like myself who doesn't live in a very humid climate. We live in a very dry climate here. So that's the next thing that I would look at. Now, the other thing is to make sure that your filament is the correct diameter. So if you're buying 1.75, take out your calipers. Try your calipers on it. We have a set of calipers right here. So what you want to do is you basically just want to take your filament and measure your filament with your calipers. And you've seen me do this before. If you've got a decent set of calipers, this should be very easy. All you're going to do is you're going to open up the calipers, you're going to put your filament in it, and then you're going to take a measurement. And you want to take a measurement in more than one spot. So you basically want to have all of this material or all these things available to you. Now, all this information is great, and I recommend that you write it down in a little notebook. Get yourself a little notebook, write this information down for the different tests that you do. So let's go on and have a look at some of the different things that we did here with the machine that we have to try and solve our under extrusion problem. Okay, let's have a look at this first cube. So we can see here on this cube that we've got some under extrusion happening. It looks like it's a layer shift, but in fact it is not. And as we move to the next slide here, we see on the side here that we have some definite under extrusion going on right along here. So we can see there is definitely under extrusion happening as we zoom in on that and zoom back out. So let's go to the next slide. Now this is the back side, and we can see that we've got tons of little holes. If we zoom in, we can see we've got all these little holes here where we are getting under extrusion. Now, if we move up, we can see it even more prevalent as we get to that line. So we can definitely see we've had under extrusion in here as well. Okay. So now we're going to go back and let's just check out the last slide on this one. And this is the very back of the cube. And if we zoom in again, we can see that we definitely have those marks again. And that line that we saw earlier is even more pronounced here with that under extrusion. You see where we're getting at? Okay. All right, so now we are going to check the next slide. And this particular cube, we go back to the front, this was our first cube. This was printed at 200 degrees on the nozzle, and it was printed at 60 degrees on the bed. So don't mind the skewing that you're seeing up in this area. That's just lens aberration from the way we photographed it. But that being said, we do definitely have an under extrusion problem. Now in the studio here, the climate is pretty much controlled, so we don't have a lot of extra wind or breezes that go through the studio. It is pretty much climate controlled down here. So now let's go on to our next one. And this is cube number 2. Now what we did here was we increased the temperature by 5 degrees. That's it. It was only increased 5 degrees. And everything else was the same. So it was 205 on the nozzle and 60 degrees on the bed. Now we can see here down at the bottom, we've got a little bit of elephant foot going on. You can see that we might be a little touch close to the bed, but that's not a big deal. And we got a little bit of a lifting corner here. So, but that being said, that's not the issues that we're concerned about today. We're going to cover those issues at another time. So the front doesn't look too bad. If we zoom in, oh, pardon me. We zoom in, we can see that that line that we had here is pretty much gone. So we've pretty much filled that in. So let's go on to the next slide. We look at the Y, and we can see as well that the Y side is not bad either. And that was only from increasing that temperature by 5 degrees. So we go to the back and we'll have a good close look at the back here. And we can see we do still have a couple of spots, but we don't have a ton of them. We've just got a few little spots here and there. And again, we don't have that serious problem. Oh, we've got some more down at the bottom, but again, it's not nearly as serious as it was in compared to the first cube. So now we're going to have a look at the very back, and in the very back, we can see there's something happening here. I had a good close look at this. This is discoloration, so it's something that came off of the nozzle. As we move this around, again, we can see that there's not a lot of under extrusion going on here. We have a few spots, but nothing as serious again as that first one. So this tells me that we have addressed the problem a little bit, not completely yet. So let's move on to our third example. Again, this one was done at 205 and 60 on the bed. Okay, no increase yet in our extrusion multiplier. Now our next test here was done at 210 degrees with 60 on the bed. Now we can see here that there's a line, there's a little bit of a layer shift, and that was caused by me. I bumped the table while it was doing this, so that's not really a big issue, other than, yeah, I bumped the table. But let's take a look at that side view again, and we can see that, you know, it's not too horrible. You know, we have a little bit of layers, a little bit of a problem with the layers here. But again, we're printing at 0.2 millimeters, so we're doing a draft quality. And it's not completely horrible. Now, let's go to the side here, and we can see that we've got a few spots again. Now we're up at 210. You see how we've got a little bit of increase in those spots of the under extrusion, and it's even more prevalent now up here at the top. We can see all those little divots. Now, if I were going to be finishing this, I wouldn't worry too much about those, but it looks like 210 was a little bit too much. 205 might be the area in which we are looking at. So at 210, it didn't really help here because, again, we are in that controlled environment. Let's move on to the last slide here. And we can see that the very back of this is actually pretty clean. Pretty clean indeed. So we just had a little bit on that one side. Not that horrible. Now, this is our last cube. This was the fourth cube that we did. And again, it looks very similar to the last cube, but here's what we did differently on this one. We actually brought the temperature back down to 205 and 60 on the bed, and I increased the extrusion multiplier, or the flow, in Cura. It's in the flow, and I'm going to show you where you can find that. We increased that to 2.5%. So our final result was 102.5%. If we have a look at this cube, we can see that it is pretty clean on that X. There's not a whole lot of things going on there. Let's look at the Y photo. And we look at the Y, and the Y is the same thing. Where we seem to be having our most problems are up near the top. And in this case, we can see that it is not happening like that at all. So, and we've got no under extrusion down at the bottom where we saw that on previous models. Now, the tail is going to be told on the one side here. Now, if we go in and we have a look, we can see that, yes, there is some minor under extrusion right here. Very minor, though. That is not causing us any issues in terms of degradation or strength of the part. And as we scroll through, we've got a couple, but see how they're more filled in now with that little bit of over extrusion. Now, I could certainly go ahead and do a little bit more. I could add another 2.5 and see where we land. And I think that might take care of that. That would bring us up to 105%. But at the same token, I don't think we really need to do that because this is pretty acceptable. Again, the filament that I'm using has been left out. We've had it out here in the studio for months and months and months on end. So that's not really the fault of the machine necessarily. This could be somewhere in the fault of the filament that's been left out for a long time. And here's our last clean side. And we can see, again, we literally have almost zero under extrusion. Again, there is no parts on this that are weak, but with that over extrusion, we are going to be dealing with this issue, which is that elephant's foot. And we can see it right here. That elephant's foot can be a little bit of an issue for people. Some people don't like that elephant's foot. I find it really easy to clean off. You just take your backside of your hobby knife and you can clean it right off. Okay, when we come back, we're going to take a look at Cura and how to increase these issues, or increase our extrusion multiplier or our flow to get things a little bit better. Okay, so we're over here at inside Cura. Now this is the latest version of Cura 4.11. And where we want to find the areas in which we want to tackle in this case is we're going to start with material. And you'll notice here that we have it at 2.5 or 205 degrees for our temperature, 60 on our bed. But when we move down here to flow, you can see we are at 1.2, 102.5, 102.5%. So if I increased that a little bit more, I would definitely get a little bit more of an elephant's foot. I might get a little bit more over extrusion. And I also could run into jamming up the head after the retraction. Okay, so something to keep in mind here is don't go too far. If all else fails and you still can't get this right, my suggestion would be try and dry out your filament a little bit. Make sure that there's no breezes in that room that you're in. Make sure the windows are closed. I know it can get quite hot. I typically recommend that people put their printers in their basements where it's just a little bit cooler, but the temperature is still about 19 degrees, where it's pretty constant. And if you've got it away from the furnace in another room, away from your furnace, you're not going to get a lot of breeze. And you don't want to have an air vent and return sitting right next to your 3D printer as well. So that can also cause issues. But this is where you're going to change it right underneath material. You're going to change your printing temperature. Again, go up in just 5-degree increments. And if that's not working for you, then try the flow and increase the flow by 2.5% each time and see where it takes away your issue. So I've seen some people where they've had it set way too high, almost to 200%, and they wonder why they're having issues. And if you just kind of look at the issues logically, there's tons of information out on the web about this. I recommend that people go out and check that out as well. So there you have it, under extrusion. It can be a real pain. It can cause you a lot of issues, but testing, and making small changes in your slicer can help to alleviate some of these issues. Go slow, take your time, print as many temperature towers or cubes or anything that you need to do. The cubes that we printed on today's show were all printed with EcoTough filament from filaments.ca. Again, I've had it around here forever. You're going to probably ask, why didn't I use the Matter 3D? Well, I didn't want to use the Matter 3D because I know that it is a higher temperature. Yes, my client does use some of their stuff, but he also uses other filaments as well, such as Arion, filaments.ca, and so on. So I wanted to go a good middle of the road. I felt that the filaments.ca was a good generic enough brand that would match some of the conditions that maybe were happening over at my client's home and in the place where he keeps his printer. So go slow, Take your time, print out as many cubes as it takes, get that flow just set right. Remember that every model is different as well. Some models may not print as well because of the smaller details on them if you're trying to print something really tiny. Other models may do just fine. So with that said, my friends, thank you very much for joining me today. I hope that you learned something, because that's what this channel is all about, teaching you the world of 3D printing. And my name's Richard. Don't forget to check us out on on Sunday for our live stream Ask for Help, where Brian and I answer your questions live from 12 to 1 every Sunday afternoon at Mountain Standard Time. We start at 12 o'clock and we end at 1. Sometimes we go over. Watch next month for a bunch of brand new contests and giveaways that we're going to be doing as we head into the Christmas season. So there's some real special stuff coming up there. And next week, we're going to tackle another issue with 3D printing to help you get the most out of your 3D printing experience. So until then, my friends, remember that the first layer is always your foundation to a great print. See you next time.